My name is Henry Wallace, and I'm 58 years old. This story takes place in the summer of 2018, during my 25th year as a park ranger in the sprawling Ozark National Forest in Arkansas. For someone like me who prefers solitude and the rhythms of nature over the hustle of city life, it was the perfect job. My days typically revolved around patrolling trails, helping lost hikers, and occasionally observing wildlife from a distance. But that summer, something happened that I still can't fully explain. It was a cool, clear morning in late June when the radio crackled to life in the ranger station. My colleague Sam Carter and I had just finished our morning coffee and were swapping stories about past rescues when the message came through. A group of hikers reported an abandoned campsite deep in the woods, well off the marked trails. Finding deserted campsites wasn't unusual, but something in the caller's tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sam and I packed up our gear and headed out in our Jeep, following the rough forest roads to a trailhead near Cedar Creek. The drive was uneventful, the dense canopy of oak and hickory trees casting long shadows over the dirt path. When we arrived, we set out on foot, the forest unusually quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves. After about an hour of hiking, we found the campsite. What we saw made my stomach churn. The tent was collapsed and shredded, its contents scattered across the forest floor. Food containers lay about, some partially eaten, others untouched. Personal belongings, including clothes, a camera, and even a wallet, were strewn across the clearing. "Wallet's still here," Sam muttered, crouching to pick it up. "Who leaves without their wallet?" "Someone in a hurry," I replied, scanning the area. An unsettling sense of unease grew in the pit of my stomach. "Let's check the surroundings. They might not be far." We split up, staying within shouting distance. I moved toward the edge of the clearing, where the trees grew denser and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly. There was an almost palpable sense of being watched, but I chalked it up to nerves. After about 20 minutes of searching, I heard Sam call out, "Henry, found something." I hurried over to find him holding a mud-caked hiking boot, the sole almost torn off. "Looks like they got into trouble," he said grimly. "We'll need a search team out here," I said, my unease growing into outright dread. We radioed in our findings and began making our way back to the Jeep. The forest felt oppressive now, the silence deafening. That night, a full search and rescue team combed the area but found nothing. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, no indication of where the campers might have gone. Over the following days, investigators identified the campers as the Davis family, a couple and their teenage son, but despite exhaustive efforts, they found no trace of them. A week later, another report came in. A couple camping near the same area claimed they had heard strange noises at night and woke up to find their campsite ransacked. The husband mentioned seeing a tall, dark figure watching them from the tree line just before dawn. Sam and I returned to investigate, this time armed with our service firearms. The forest felt different that day, darker, heavier. When we reached the couple's campsite, the scene was eerily similar to the first. Scattered belongings, shredded tents, and an overwhelming sense of panic lingering in the air. Determined to get to the bottom of this, we decided to spend the night there. It was just after midnight when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. I shook Sam awake, and we both grabbed our flashlights and weapons. The sound grew louder, coming from the dense thicket at the edge of the clearing. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with an impossibly gaunt frame and skin that seemed almost translucent under the beam of our flashlights. Its eyes reflected the light with an eerie silver sheen. "What the hell is that?" Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. Before I could respond, the creature lunged at us with inhuman speed. Sam fired, the gunshot echoing through the forest, but the creature barely flinched. It knocked him to the ground, its long, bony fingers clawing at his chest. I fired twice, the shots landing squarely in its torso. The creature let out a high-pitched wail that sent shivers down my spine before retreating into the forest, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Sam was shaken but mostly unharmed. We grabbed our gear and left immediately, keeping our guns drawn as we made our way back to the Jeep. Back at the station, we reported the encounter, but our supervisor dismissed it as a bear attack or perhaps just our imaginations running wild. In the weeks that followed, the forest seemed to return to normal. The usual sounds of wildlife came back, and no more reports of strange occurrences surf. But Sam and I knew better. The memory of that creature haunted us both, a constant reminder that there are things in this world we don't understand. I stayed on as a ranger, but Sam left the job a few months later. The forest, once a place of solace and wonder for both of us, had become something far more sinister. Even now, years later, I'll occasionally catch a glimpse of movement in the shadows, or feel the prickle of unseen eyes on my back. I don't know what we encountered that night, but I do know one thing. The Ozark National Forest is not as serene as it seems. My name is Jonathan Clark, and I'm 65 years old. This story takes place in the summer of 2021, during my 30th year as a park ranger in the remote Whispering Pines National Forest in Montana. For someone like me, who finds solace in the embrace of nature and prefers the quiet of the woods over the clamor of city life, it was the perfect job. But that summer, my connection to the forest would be tested in ways I could never have imagined. It was late July when I came across something that would change my life forever. I was on a routine patrol, checking an old, less traveled trail in the northern part of the park. The trail had been closed off for years due to erosion, but I wanted to ensure the area was still safe for wildlife. The morning air was crisp and sunlight filtered through the towering pines, casting golden beams on the forest floor. It was one of those perfect days that reminded me why I loved this job. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon something strange. In a small clearing, half hidden by overgrown brush, stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Its weathered wood was gray with age, and vines crept up its walls, almost as if the forest was trying to reclaim it. In all my years patrolling Whispering Pines, I had never seen this structure before. It wasn't on any of the park maps, and its presence sent a chill down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. The cabin's door hung loosely on its hinges, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. The interior was dim, with only slivers of sunlight piercing through the cracks in the walls. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, but it was clear that someone had lived here once. An old iron stove stood in one corner, and a rickety table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. What caught my eye, however, was a leather-bound journal lying on the table. It looked out of place, almost untouched by time. I picked it up carefully, flipping through its yellowed pages. The handwriting was neat but shaky, as if written by someone in distress. The entries spoke of strange sightings in the forest, a tall, gaunt creature with glowing eyes that seemed to watch from the shadows. The writer called it the Varanid and described it as a guardian of the forest, ancient and powerful. One passage in particular stood out: July 15th, 1958. Saw it again today near the Whispering Creek. It was taller than any man, with limbs like branches and skin pale as moonlight. It moved silently, faster than anything I've ever seen. I tried to follow it, but it vanished into the mist. The Varanid is real, and it's watching us. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had written this had seen something extraordinary and terrifying. As I read, the forest outside grew unnaturally quiet. The usual sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves had disappeared, replaced by an oppressive silence. A sense of unease settled over me, and I decided it was time to leave. As I stepped outside, I noticed the sky had darkened. Thick clouds rolled in, casting the forest in shadow. I felt an inexplicable urge to look back at the cabin, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with elongated limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the dim light like silver mirrors. My heart pounded as the figure stepped closer, its movements fluid yet unnervingly silent. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The creature stopped a few yards away, tilting its head as if studying me. For what felt like an eternity, we stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it disappeared into the forest, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves in its wake. Shaken, I returned to the ranger station and reported what I had seen. My colleagues were skeptical, chalking it up to a trick of the light or my imagination. But I knew what I had seen was real. Over the following weeks, I became obsessed with the Varanid. I pored over the journal, scouring it for clues. It mentioned a hidden cave deep in the forest, said to be the creature's dwelling. Against my better judgment, I decided to find it. The search took me to parts of Whispering Pines I'd never explored before. The forest grew denser, the trees older and more twisted. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Finally, after days of searching, I found the cave. Its entrance was carved into the base of a massive oak tree, surrounded by ancient symbols etched into the bark. The markings seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. I hesitated, but curiosity and a strange sense of purpose propelled me forward. Inside, the air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of earth and moss. The cave walls were smooth, almost polished, and adorned with more of those glowing symbols. Deeper inside, The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. At its center was something that defied explanation. A pool of liquid light, swirling with colors I couldn't name. Images flickered across its surface. Forests, mountains, rivers, and creatures both familiar and alien. As I stared into the pool, I felt a presence behind me. Turning slowly, I saw the Varanid standing at the edge of the chamber. But this time, it didn't feel threatening. Its eyes, though alien, held a depth of emotion that was almost human. It stepped closer and reached out a long, branch-like hand, gesturing toward the pool. Hesitantly, I touched the surface. In that moment, my mind was flooded with visions. I saw the world as the Varanid saw it, an intricate web of life and energy, all connected. I understood the forest in ways I never thought possible, its rhythms, its secrets, its ancient wisdom. The Varanid and others like it were its guardians, protecting the balance of nature from those who would harm it. When the visions faded, I found myself back at the cave entrance, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. The Varanid was gone, but its presence lingered. I knew my life had changed forever. Whispering Pines was no longer just a place of work. It was a sanctuary, a living, breathing entity that I was now a part of. In the years since that day, I've continued my work as a ranger, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I've become an advocate for conservation, sharing my experiences, as much as people will believe, to inspire others to protect the natural world. The Varanid remains a mystery, but its message is clear. We are all connected, and it is our duty to care for the earth. Every now and then, on quiet nights, I'll venture into the deeper parts of the forest. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of movement in the shadows or hear the faint rustle of leaves where there should be none. And in those moments, I feel a profound sense of peace, knowing that the guardians of Whispering Pines are watching over us all. My name is Daniel Harper, and I'm 64 years old. This story takes place in the summer of 2019, during my 27th year as a park ranger at Echo Valley State Park in Connecticut. For most of my career, I'd thought I'd seen everything, from lost hikers to rogue bears. But that summer, the forest revealed something I wasn't prepared for, something that haunts me to this day. It started on a humid July evening. I was finishing my rounds when my radio crackled. It was Claire, a new ranger, and she sounded terrified. "Daniel, I need help. I'm near the old quarry. It's not right." Her voice was shaky, filled with raw fear. The quarry was a place most rangers avoided after dark. Rumors surrounded it. Strange lights, eerie sounds, and disappearances dating back decades. I grabbed my flashlight, my gun, and a sense of unease I couldn't shake, then headed out. The forest was unusually silent as I approached the quarry. Even the nocturnal insects seemed to have vanished. Claire's Jeep was parked haphazardly on the side of the trail, its lights still on, but she was nowhere to be seen. "Claire?" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. There was no response, only the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. I followed a faint trail leading into the quarry. The air grew colder with every step, and the darkness seemed heavier, almost alive. My flashlight caught glimpses of deep gouges in the rock walls, as if something massive had clawed its way through. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then I found her. Claire was huddled against the quarry wall, her knees drawn to her chest, her face pale as the moon, her wide eyes locked onto mine as I approached. "We have to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's here." "What's here?" I asked, crouching next to her. Before she could answer, a low, guttural growl echoed through the quarry. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard, a deep, metallic sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. "We need to leave. Now," I said, pulling Claire to her feet. But before we could move, something stepped into the beam of my flashlight. It was tall, at least 8 feet, and its body seemed to shimmer, shifting between forms. One moment it looked like polished metal, the next like jagged rock. Its eyes glowed a piercing blue, and its face, it had no mouth, just a dark void where one should have been. The creature's head tilted, as if studying us. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. Claire let out a strangled sob, clutching my arm. The creature took a step forward, and the air grew impossibly cold. My breath fogged as I raised my gun, hands trembling. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. It didn't listen. Instead, it lunged toward us with impossible speed. I fired twice. The bullets hit its chest, but the creature barely flinched. It let out a shriek, a sound like grinding metal, and swiped at me with an arm that was more like a blade. I barely dodged in time, the edge cutting through my sleeve and grazing my skin. "Run!" I yelled, shoving Claire toward the trail. We sprinted through the forest, the creature's heavy footsteps pounding behind us. It moved with a fluidity that defied its massive size, its glowing eyes cutting through the darkness like headlights. Branches whipped at my face as we ran, and my lungs burned with every breath. I could hear Claire sobbing, her terror matching my own. The creature let out another ear-piercing shriek, closer now. We reached my truck at the edge of the forest, and I practically threw Claire into the passenger seat before jumping in myself. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, gravel spraying as we sped away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature standing at the tree line, its glowing eyes fixed on us until we disappeared around a bend. Back at the station, I radioed for backup and tried to explain what had happened. My supervisor listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he simply nodded and said, "Get some rest. We'll handle it." But they didn't handle it. The quarry was roped off, the incident written off as a bear attack. Claire quit the next day, and I can't blame her. But I couldn't let it go. I had to know what that thing was. Over the next few weeks, I started digging. The quarry's history was murky, filled with rumors of miners disappearing in the early 1900s and Native American legends about stone guardians protecting sacred ground. The more I learned, the more I felt like I'd stumbled onto something ancient and dangerous. Then one night I saw it again. I was patrolling near the quarry, against orders, when a faint blue light caught my eye. It was coming from deep within the forest. My pulse quickened as I followed it, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The light led me to the quarry, where the creature stood waiting. But this time, it wasn't alone. 3 others emerged from the shadows, their forms shifting and glowing like the first. They surrounded the quarry's edge, their movements synchronized as if performing some kind of ritual. In the center of the quarry, the ground began to crack. A deep rumble shook the earth and a blinding blue light erupted from the fissure. I shielded my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. When the light faded, the creatures were gone, and the quarry was silent once more. I don't know what I witnessed that night, but I've never gone back. The park is quiet again, the quarry off limits to visitors. But sometimes, on still nights, I hear that metallic growl echoing through the trees, and I know the creatures are still there, waiting for something. I've told this story a few times, but no one believes me. They laugh, say I've spent too many years in the woods. Maybe they're right, but if you ever find yourself near Echo Valley State Park and you hear a sound like grinding metal, take my advice, don't follow it. Some things are better left undisturbed. My name is Arthur Turner, and I'm 66 years old. This story happened in the autumn of 2017, during my 25th year as a park ranger at Whispering Pines State Park in northern Minnesota. Over the years, I've dealt with all kinds of incidents: reckless campers, wandering bears, even the occasional poacher, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered that October. To this day, I wish I could erase it from my memory. The air had that crisp, sharp chill of fall, and the leaves were a patchwork of red, orange, and gold. I was out on a routine patrol, tasked with checking the northern perimeter fence. It was early evening, and the forest was already shrouded in twilight. As I walked, I noticed the usual sounds of the woods: chirping birds, rustling leaves, beginning to fade. The silence crept in, thick and unnatural, like a heavy fog settling over everything. About halfway through my route, I found a section of the fence completely mangled. It wasn't just broken. It looked as though something with incredible strength had torn through it. The wooden posts were splintered, and the metal links were twisted into bizarre shapes. My gut told me this wasn't the work of any animal I'd ever encountered. I radioed the station. "Hey, Marcy, I'm up on the north fence, found some heavy damage here. Looks odd. You heard about any big animals roaming this far south?" "Nope," Marcy replied, her voice crackling through the static. "Closest thing we've had is a moose sighting last week, but they don't do that kind of damage. Want me to send someone out?" I hesitated. "Not yet. Let me check it out first. I'll keep you posted." Following the trail of destruction, I stepped beyond the fence and into the deeper woods. The silence pressed against my ears, and every snap of a twig underfoot made me jump. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the unease in my chest wouldn't go away. About a quarter-mile in, I stumbled upon a campsite, or what was left of one. 2 tents were shredded, their fabric hanging in tatters. Gear was scattered everywhere: a smashed lantern, a bent camping stove, and torn sleeping bags. There were bloodstains on the ground. Not a lot, but enough to make my stomach churn. "Jesus," I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I bent down to inspect the area, looking for tracks or any sign of what might have happened. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Huge, far too large to be human, and shaped unlike any animal I'd ever seen. Each print was nearly 2 feet long, with elongated toes ending in deep claw marks. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Arthur? You okay? You've been quiet a while." I'm not sure what I'm looking at, Marcy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's blood here. And tracks. Big ones. I'm going to follow them a bit farther." "Arthur, maybe you should wait for backup," Marcy said, her tone laced with concern. "I'll be fine," I lied. "Just stay on the radio." The tracks led deeper into the woods where the trees grew older and more twisted, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The further I went, the darker it became, until my flashlight was the only thing piercing the gloom. The air grew colder, and I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I came to a small clearing, dominated by an enormous oak tree that looked ancient enough to have stood since the dawn of time. At its base was something that made my blood run cold, a pile of bones. They were scattered haphazardly, some animal, some unmistakably human. My hand tightened around the grip of my flashlight as I scanned the area, my heart hammering in my chest. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl so deep it seemed to vibrate through the ground. I spun around, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. That's when I saw it. The creature was tall, impossibly tall, with a gaunt, elongated frame. Its skin was pale and mottled, almost like tree bark, and its limbs were unnaturally long, but it was its eyes that froze me in place. Massive black voids that seemed to swallow the light. It stepped closer, its movements unnervingly fluid, like it wasn't bound by the same laws of physics as everything else. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, but my body refused to move. The creature tilted its head, studying me with an intelligence that felt alien and predatory. Then it opened its mouth, a jagged, unnatural gash, and let out a piercing shriek that made my ears ring and my vision blur. The spell broke, and I bolted. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, my flashlight bouncing wildly in the darkness. The creature's heavy footsteps thundered behind me, growing louder with every passing second. I could feel its presence closing in, its breath cold against the back of my neck. Somehow I made it back to the fence. I scrambled through the mangled section and didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and started the engine, my hands trembling so badly it took 3 tries to turn the key. As I sped down the dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature stood just beyond the tree line, its black eyes gleaming in the headlights before it disappeared into the shadows. Back at the station, I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. Marcy took one look at me and called for backup. The search team arrived within the hour, but they found nothing. The campsite was gone, the tracks erased, as if the forest itself had conspired to hide the evidence. In the days that followed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black voids staring back at me. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just a bear or some trick of the light, but deep down, I knew the truth. I'd seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. I retired the following year, unable to shake the memory of that night. But even now, years later, I can't escape it. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees, I hear that same guttural growl, low and menacing, and I wonder if the creature is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. So if you ever find yourself in Whispering Pines, and the forest falls silent, and you feel eyes watching you from the darkness, turn back. Don't go any farther, because some things are better left undisturbed. My name is Evan Wright, and I'm 62 years old. This story takes place in the fall of 2016, during my final year as a park ranger at Sleeping Giant State Park in Connecticut. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to the eerie quiet of the forest at night, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional unsettling sounds carried on the wind. But one night that October, something happened that defies all explanation. To this day, I can't decide whether I was lucky to survive or cursed to remember. The evening started like any other. The park was calm, with only a handful of campers braving the chilly weather. I was patrolling the southern edge near the old quarry, a place steeped in local legends about strange lights and unexplained disappearances. Most of the stories were nonsense I'd told myself over the years, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of unease settled over me. I was about to head back to the station when my radio crackled to life. It was Sarah, A young ranger on her first season. Her voice was frantic, barely coherent. Evan, near the quarry. There's something here. Sarah, what's going on? I asked, already heading in the direction of her voice. The silence that followed made my stomach churn. I reached the quarry within minutes. Sarah's truck was parked haphazardly on the trail, its headlights cutting through the encroaching fog. The air was colder here, and the usual sounds of the forest had vanished. My flashlight scanned the area, catching glimpses of jagged rocks and shifting shadows. Then I saw her. Sarah was standing near the quarry's edge, her back to me. She didn't move, didn't even acknowledge my calls. When I approached, I saw her face. It was pale, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on something in the darkness below. "Sarah, what is it?" I asked, grabbing her shoulder. She pointed a trembling hand toward the quarry floor. "It's awake," she whispered. I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. A faint blue light pulsed from the center of the quarry, illuminating strange symbols carved into the rock. They were intricate and ancient-looking, glowing as if alive. The light seemed to throb in time with my heartbeat, growing brighter with every pulse. Then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and shimmering like a mirage. It was tall, impossibly so, with elongated limbs and skin that glinted like polished stone. Its eyes were the most unsettling part, two glowing orbs of blue light that seemed to pierce straight through me. "We have to leave," Sarah said, tugging at my arm, but I couldn't move. The creature's gaze held me in place, an overwhelming sense of dread rooting me to the spot. It stepped closer, its movements unnaturally smooth as if it floated rather than walked. Before I could react, another figure appeared. This one was human, or at least it seemed to be. An old man, his face lined with age and his eyes gleaming with the same eerie blue light. He stepped between us and the creature, raising a hand as if to ward it off. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice low and resonant. "It's waking up. They all are." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The man turned to me, his expression grim. "This land is ancient, older than you can imagine. The stone shifter. It's a guardian, a harbinger of things that should never wake. You need to leave now." Before I could respond, the creature let out a sound that defied description. It was a mix of grinding metal and a deep, guttural growl, vibrating through the air and into my chest. The symbols on the quarry walls flared brighter, casting the entire area in an otherworldly glow. "Run!" the old man shouted, his voice breaking through my paralysis. Sarah and I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted toward her truck, the light from the quarry growing brighter behind us. As we reached the vehicle, I glanced back and saw the creature. No, creatures. More of them were emerging from the shadows, their forms twisting and shifting like living stone. We tore down the trail, the headlights barely cutting through the dense fog. The air around us felt charged, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. I could still hear that sound, the grinding, guttural noise, echoing in my ears long after we left the quarry behind. Back at the station, I tried to explain what we'd seen, but the words felt inadequate. The other rangers listened, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. Sarah quit the next day, saying she couldn't set foot in the park again. I stayed, but I couldn't bring myself to return to the quarry. Over the weeks that followed, strange reports trickled in. Campers spoke of glowing lights in the woods and shadows that moved on their own. A hiker claimed to have heard voices whispering his name from the trees. And then, there were the disappearances, 2 in the span of a month, both near the southern edge of the park. I knew the truth, or at least part of it. The stone shifter and its kin weren't just legends. They were real, and they were waking up. I spent hours researching the park's history, digging into old records and local folklore. The stories were fragmented but consistent. Ancient beings tied to the land, guardians of something buried deep beneath the earth. One night, I ventured back to the quarry. I told myself it was for closure, but deep down I knew I was drawn there by something I couldn't explain. The symbols were still there, faint but visible, etched into the stone like scars. The air was heavy, charged with the same oppressive energy I'd felt that night. And then I heard it, the low growl, the grinding hum of the creatures stirring. I didn't wait to see them. I ran, faster than I'd ever run, the sound following me all the way back to my truck. I retired at the end of the year, unable to shake the feeling that I'd seen only the beginning of something far greater. Sleeping Giant State Park remains open, but I can't help but wonder how long it will stay that way. The stone shifter and its kin are out there, waiting in the shadows, and I fear the day they fully awaken. If you ever find yourself near the quarry and see a faint blue light, turn back. Don't go looking for answers. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some guardians are better left undisturbed.